What makes young people crave the rave?
I'm curious what makes you so curious. What makes you so curious.
In the beginning was the beat.
Welcome to the Rave Curious Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Glazer. What are we curious about? We're curious about electronic music and the culture that surrounds it. How do we satisfy that curiosity? We do it by talking to the people who have dedicated their lives to this scene and to this community. Today on the podcast, we have two people who have absolutely dedicated their lives to this music. We have on the program today Tommie Sunshine. Tommie is one of the kind of great characters in the history of the American rave scene. His history goes back to the early 90s, where he started throwing parties in the Midwest, later becoming a DJ himself, moving on to New York in the early 2000s, being incredibly active in the Brooklyn electroclash scene, and still really active today. Tommie lives in Brooklyn still, runs his Brooklyn Fire record imprint, and we had a really good conversation. When you get two old ravers together, invariably you're going to start with tales of parties gone by and some honestly some drug stories, and me and Tommie definitely our conversation started off that way, for sure, but then as we got a little further into it, we got into some really I'd say more interesting topics. It's been a few years since I've spoken to Tommie, and recently, since we last spoke, he's become something of an activist, doing work for like the Bernie Sanders campaign, marching for Black Lives Matter, things of that sort. And so the conversation is honestly, it's not what I expected when I sat down with Tommie, but I'm really happy it went that way. But before we get to that, we have a second interview, which is actually going to be the first interview for you to hear, and that is my talk with Cornelius Harris. Cornelius is the label manager from Underground Resistance, one of the all-time great Detroit techno labels, known not just for classic tracks like Knights of the Jaguar, but also for its fiercely independent, some would say militantly anti-corporate stance when it comes with dealing with the music business at large, and how a small independent label from a city like Detroit can thrive even in today's electronic music industry. Cornelius, I've also known for a very long time. We're both from Detroit, but this conversation started. It came about because of a couple things that popped up on Facebook last week. Some conversations, some discourses, some debates about the current state of electronic music, specifically about how some of the older generation from Detroit is represented in the larger picture in the media. Some discussions about race, some discussions about opportunity, so it was start off on Facebook, and I hit up Cornelius, and I was like, let's talk for a few minutes. We ended up talking for quite a few minutes. Our conversation went for about 40 minutes. I trimmed it down to about 30 minutes, honestly, so we don't keep you here all day. We're going to start off with a 30-minute conversation with Cornelius Harris from Underground Resistance, and right after that, we're going to go straight into my talk with Tommie Sunshine. Both are really, really good. I was really happy with both of them, and I hope you enjoy them too. Real quick, if you do enjoy these conversations or any of the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or whatever podcast software you use. And once you subscribe, what would be amazing is if you would leave a review on iTunes. I recently found out that the reviews on iTunes can really make a difference in spreading the word about this podcast. Obviously, you can post it on social media, you can tweet to us at Rave Curious. All of these things are great, but also add to your to-do list if you would be so kind. Give us a review, even if you don't like it. Tell us if you don't like it. But the feedback we've gotten so far has been really, really positive. It makes us enjoy doing it. Coming out with a new podcast every other week. That's it. I'm gonna go into it now. The Rave Curious Podcast this week with Cornelius Harris, followed immediately by Tommie Sunshine. Thanks for listening. So I want to start with, a post that you made on Facebook last week that kind of got us talking originally regarding an article that came out on Thump about Al Ester, who is, for those who didn't read the article, and kind of the point of the article is not a lot of people know who Al Ester is. Outside of Detroit, he is, one of the great old school local Detroit house and techno DJs who for various reasons, which I'll let you speak to, hasn't really gone on to the national or international stage. He's very much stayed a local treasure. And that was kind of the premise of the piece. And it also made mention of the fact that he has a day job working in a nursing home. And it seemed like some people took offense to that fact being published, or that, that being a premise for the piece. So, rather than me, massacring your opinion, why don't you just start by, give us a take what you posted on Facebook and what your feelings were about this article?
Well, I will tell you, my issue with it wasn't really in connection with the article itself. Actually, at the time, my concern was more on the editorial and the way it was described. My concern was that when the article came out, it made reference to it was more the I think the tone of what the article seemed to be implying, which to me was concerned that it seemed to be saying that there was a problem with him being a Detroit DJ that wasn't necessarily traveling around the world and that. And the article itself didn't seem to be saying that. I think it was more the headline. And so
the headline, just to be specific to the readers, is the headline reads, "Detroit's most unheralded techno DJ works in a nursing home."
Right.
That was the exact
right.
That was the exact headline. So just so we're clear, because these nuances I think matter in these conversations.
Right. Absolutely. And I think part of my reason for that is that it seemed like it was saying that this is a problem. That this guy working in a nursing home is an implication of something negative. And then also that, unheralded, in my mind seemed to, be equated with, going to Europe. And as I read through the article itself, I didn't necessarily get that impression. I mean, I got the impression that there were certain things that Al, and let me just say for the record that Al Ester is an incredible DJ.
Right.
He's a great guy, and he's fantastic. And one of the things that I had stressed in the very beginning is that that's the story that a lot of people have. There's a lot of guys who do not do this 24/7. They're fantastic DJs or producers, musicians, what have you, but they also have another job to supplement that income and to really keep themselves in a good place. So there's nothing wrong with that. And again, with the particular title, it seemed to imply to me that there was something wrong with that. Now, again, I mean, in the article itself, reading about some of what Al was quoted as saying, I think, there's certain things that he might feel like he wishes were different. But at the same time, I didn't read it as a negative article. The article itself I thought was fantastic because I think that he's somebody that definitely other people should know about. I mean, I think that, people should definitely know that, hey, here's this great guy here. But at the same time, my question was that could that have been communicated in a way without putting the implication that there's something wrong with him working in a nursing home as well. So that's, I think, where my concern was. And I pointed out that I think those are editorial decisions, not necessarily decisions of the writer. But also there's concern that, some people may get the wrong impression looking at a title or headline and maybe kind of walk away with something in their heads other than what's actually in the content of the article.
Sure. So it basically comes down to, which is a very common discussion, and more in today's, newsfeed world where headlines really have to grab attention immediately and try to get people in, and they might not always be completely in the spirit of the article, but you need to, I think a lot of editors, and, myself being a writer and an editor, there's the argument to be made that if you could write the best article ever and try to, really shed some light, port somebody, get whatever the ultimate goal is, assuming it's a positive, but you got to get eyeballs on it. And so that would be the counter argument to such a thing. And I don't know that we necessarily need to, debate that back and forth. I think that's been really covered in general, discussing the media and particularly online media in this day and age.
You're talking about just the whole issue of clicks?
I guess, yeah, basically, where do you balance between having, do what you got to do to get people to look at it to begin with, and then from there, then the content is what it is. Like you said, you liked the article. It was the headline.
Well, here's the thing that I think is potentially, dangerous about that, is that there's a few reasons why I think that it's a tricky thing. One, as somebody who, let's say, is got tons of different things running through their feed, you see something like that, and again, given that it's kind of got this negative thing, some people might say, okay, cool, I got that. Here's this guy in Detroit who is upset because he's working in a nursing home, and blah blah blah. Okay, and nobody knows who he is. Okay, cool, and they keep moving. And so what happens is that's what some people are going to walk away with before, and again, it's not what's actually in the content of the article, but based on that headline, that's what they're walking away with. And they're kind of saying, okay, cool, this is what this article is about. Yeah, I'm not interested. And they keep going. So there's a dangerous association that can be made between the headline and the artist that I think is an unfair one.
All right.
And so that's something that I think is important. The other thing about it is, and this is just a more broader cultural thing, is that I think that a lot of things have become a data obsessed, culture. And it's not just in terms of getting clicks on different websites. I mean, I'd say that extends to, even education as a whole, where, teachers are basically told, look, you know what, to hell with the curriculum. We want you to focus on these numbers. And so we're going to teach to these tests. And we need to show that we can get these numbers up. We're not really concerned with the educational part of it. People just like to see that the school numbers are up. And that means you're a good school because your numbers are up. And there's no real way for us to assess real education. So let's forget about education and let's focus on these numbers. And again, in the music industry as a whole, this whole thing of, your value is equated with your clicks. And so if I'm an EDM person and, getting all this flash, through the expensive music videos and whatnot, that is, I guess, is supposed to mean that I'm better than someone who has, less views. Now, never mind, it's, a lot of those views are manufactured, and never mind that I've paid for those views. The thing is, I'm a guy who goes and spends all this money to do this, or I have access to funds, then that means apparently that I'm supposed to be a better performer or something. And we know that that's not the case. So I think that this whole shift of being obsessed with data is as an overall negative. And I think it's really, unfortunately, detrimental to a lot of quality stuff that ends up being disregarded solely based on numbers.
Okay. Well, and one thing certainly, nobody could accuse you of, or you or the artists you've worked with, is opting for, going for the numbers over going for the purity of the message or the purity of the art. So if anyone can say that, it would definitely be you. And this also this segs very nicely into the next thing I want to talk about, which was, at the same time when this discussion was going on, at the same time you had, there was another parallel thread, not connected in any official way, but, last week Juan Atkins posted something on his Facebook page, the short version basically calling out the DJ list, which is a website that ranks DJs basically called, in no uncertain terms, said that the list was racist and called for, I had it open here, called for it to be destroyed, dismantled, deleted, and replaced. And you didn't get involved in the conversation so much, but it's showing me right here you did like the post. And given the rest of our conversation, I think it's worth talking about. For those who don't know, the DJ list, it's an older website. It's been around since the 90s, and it rates the DJs, not voting, like something like the RA list or the DJ Mag list, where it's strictly people vote for the DJs. And it's not an editorial decision. There is no staff deciding who this list is. The way they do it is a mix of, registered users who, say, I like this DJ, I like this DJ, I like this DJ, I like this DJ. And then also a mix of, kind of algorithmic stuff having to do with, their various social media data, their Google data, a bunch of different things, which is proprietary. We don't know exactly how it works. But the result, as one would expect, almost the entire list is super EDM heavy. I'd say it's 95% EDM. And it's also, according to the count Juan saw, it's 98% white. So if you look at the list now, I think it was maybe 97% white or 99% white. What is your take on that? I guess the first question is that really, in your opinion, is the list racist, as Juan said? And the second question I think is maybe more involved is this type of list with all this, mainstream, million-selling pop music EDM, is this a list that uncompromised techno artists should even be concerned about?
Well, okay, I'm gonna say a few things about that. Number one, I think that Juan's being unhappy with the list. Period. I could identify with, and I think that a lot of what he said was just on point, and so that's why I liked the post. I didn't get into a lot of the discussion, a lot of the conflict there. I mean, it was kind of. It's funny. I'm on social media, but I've got so much that I'm working on outside of that sometimes things get intense to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna watch.
Yeah, exactly. Get the popcorn.
Yeah, and so there's that, but also I think that whenever you have a system and you've got a mysterious algorithm that no one knows what it is, it makes it difficult to say anything either way because it's hidden. And so you can only look at the results. You can kind of, look at some of the circumstances around it, but really you look at the results. I will say that it also, in my mind, it makes me think of all the stuff around the Oscars as well.
Oh yeah, it's very, very timely in that way.
It's all really kind of funny how the things actually happen to come to a head at the same time. But yeah, the implication that there just aren't any good black DJs is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's like and the thing is, you get into this whole conversation about you've got these people who kind of come up with this genre, and then the next thing you know, you're being told that you're not good enough to do the genre. So you're good enough to start it, but you're not good enough to actually play it. And I think that's insane. I think that's absolutely insane. I also think that there's a lot of things that are skewed from the jump. And again, I talked before about, again, you're looking at data and you're data obsessed. And so as far as this algorithm goes, if you're looking at clicks and if you're looking at video views, number one, a lot of black electronic artists don't have music videos. So if you're using that in your algorithm, then by default, you're not going to have a lot of guys on there. Should it be a requirement that as an artist you have to have videos? That's a conversation, but that's a conversation that also goes back to money. And again, you've kind of got this, chicken or the egg. Do you, have money and then you do your thing, or do you do your thing to get money? I think that sometimes, Juan's concern is that there are a lot of people, a lot of event promoters and festivals that they basically do all of their programming based around these lists. They're not actually looking to curate a particular event and have certain artists at their event. What they're interested in is just trying to figure out numbers. And so there's a lot of what I would call no-name EDM artists who have access to funds. And so they can pay to have, the video done and pay to have all the clicks. And again, not to say that people aren't, checking out these videos, but No, a whole lot of them are paid for. A whole lot of them are paid for, and that's not a secret. You can, pay to get Facebook likes and all these other things. So, it's becomes a question of money. And if we're talking about wealth and access to wealth, well, then, you're going to say, well, yeah, the numbers are going to say they're going to be more, well-to-do young white people than well-to-do young black people. That's just statistics. That's just numbers. That's just the reality of the economics of the world that we're living in. So you're just not going to see that. And so I think that the list themselves, I think, yeah, it's irrelevant in that sense. It's irrelevant to anything that anybody who actually has come up with the genre is doing. And that's why I think that what Juan said was right and on point, because I think that, it's not something that's reflective of anything outside of that. Now, again, if you're a booker and you don't know anything about the music in the first place, and that is the case with a lot of bookers as well, well then, yeah, you know what? Your only reference is going to be this list. Your only reference, and it's not just that list, it's all these lists. They look at, 3 or 4 lists and they say, okay, based on these lists, this is how we're going to book our event. And they go ahead and do that. And you know that there's a lot of, venues that are, just, known for cheese. There's a lot of festivals that are just known for cheese. I'm going to say that, what I've always said about EDM is that EDM is basically the arena rock, of the 2000s. Course, yeah. And so, whenever you have that in general, yeah, it tends to skew white because the population that these things are designed for is white. It's actually, a lot of the stuff isn't designed for what I would say electronic music fans. It's more for the arena rock oriented fans. And so that's where that goes. I don't think that a lot of these guys are interested in going that route musically. But I also would say that, if you did have, and this would be an interesting thing to see. I'm wondering, if you did have, let's say, a young version of Underground Resistance come out, we didn't know what they looked like. Would they have a higher level of success? Because that's what it does come down to. It's a question of, look, is this, based upon the music or is it based upon the color? And that's something that, truth be told, no one has actually, looked into or been concerned with, because people are going about their way making their money and they don't care. But I think that as an artist who has been impacted by that, I think it's fair for that artist to be concerned about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one of the, obviously what you're talking about is it's tough and it's very hard to control for one variable to, prove another variable. Like you said, it would be really interesting if kind of a faceless, high quality young techno act came out. But, it's interesting because the one black face on the list, well, there's 2 actually, as I'm looking at it right now, and it's changed a little more. It's funny, it's actually skewed quite a bit more techno heavy in the past week. Not any black artists, but it's like Richie Hawtin's now on there, Adam Bayer, Marco Carolla, Sven Väth, people who, at least from a genre standpoint, are closer to, what Juan does and what Detroit techno sound is compared to the EDM guys. The one face that's been on there the entire time, well, there's 2. There's Carl Cox and then there's Carnage. And it's interesting because they couldn't be more far apart. Carl Cox is, roughly the same age as Juan. He plays, what would definitely be described as techno. We did he's obviously he's kind of extended family. We did, we had him come by the Submerge office and we shot some stuff with him and Carl Craig 2 years ago. Like, he's of the age, he's of the genre, and yet somehow he's managed to carve a space for himself in what is otherwise this, very young, very white, very pop oriented community, the DJ list community. And then the other name on it is Carnage, who is American. I guess that's one thing worth maybe pointing out is that, Carl Cox is from the UK. So there's, maybe a bit of a cultural difference there. But then there's Carnage, who's American, makes, very aggressive trap music, more or less, is young, is black. So interesting that you kind of have the, probably basically the 2 polar opposites are the two black faces on the list. And I wonder, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, first off, in terms of what Carl Cox is doing, has done, I can't say enough about the guy. I mean, he's a great individual as a person, but then musically, yeah, he's doing that thing, and he's doing it well, incredibly well. And I think that I mean, truth be told, it's funny. In the couple of times that I spoke with him, we never talked about that, but it would be a question for me in terms of, man, how'd you make this stuff happen? But the thing is, and again, Carl Cox has managed to do some stuff that really no one else has been able to pull off. It's like he's that one. And I think that that's always the funny thing about something like that is that, you look at it and you end up finding, just the one. So, but I think that it's a great thing, and I would say that my guess is that Carl would also be able to speak to the fact that there are dozens of other great artists of color who don't get out there like that. But that being said, he's it's great to see him on there. With Carnage, I mean, honestly, I don't know a lot about him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know kind of, how he's, gets himself out there or whatnot. And truthfully, my thing is that for anybody who's actually really working, and that's the other thing. I mean, I know for a fact that Carl Cox works. So,
oh, yes.
For the guys who are actually working and really doing it, I'm like, more power to you. Because, that's something there, and that's what this is all about. This is about people who are actually putting in time, putting in work, and making works of sonic beauty. So I mean, and just recognize them as for the artists that they are. So yeah, I mean, Carl is great. Carnage, I don't know as much about, and again, it's not. But on the other side of it, again, we know about there are tons of memes that go around with folks who perform with nothing connected.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if it's a matter of saying, let me throw in a CD and then pretend that I'm, and just dance up on stage, I'm like, all right, well then, yeah, you're looking at a puppet show or whatever else. And that's fine. If that's what you're into, and if all you need is a CD playing, I'm like, hey, a lot of people could get over, with your events by just, making up a, DJ Invisible or whatever else, just have some guy who just isn't even there, and just pop in the CD, and you save yourself a bunch of money. That DJ could play in 12 different clubs at the same night, and wouldn't be a problem. I think that if that's where it's at, then I'm like, whatever. It's and unfortunately, I think that's again where these clubs and these venues are leaning towards. They're not concerned with actual performance. A lot of these guys, no, they could never stand toe to toe with any of these DJs that really play. And again, when it comes to dancing, it's funny. Just thinking about Al Esther. I mean, Al Esther, one of the things about him is that he is so into the music, so devoted to the music, so, his connection with it is so strong. I mean, he's one of those guys that's not scared to dance while he spins. But he's really spinning. And he's really playing. And so you're not getting, some performance designed to make people think that he's cool. Nah, he's actually moved by the music, and he's one of those DJs that lets the music go out in front of him. He's not trying to. That's the thing. I mean, Al, I think, was never a guy to present himself like he's a superstar DJ or whatever else. He was a guy who was like, no, I love great music, and I know how to play great music in a way that's going to move other people. And so that's what he's done. There are people who are in love with the music and put that first, and you can hear it in the sets. I made a reference to, one of the things that Al is responsible for, which I thought was always kind of great, is that he used to work in the jazz station. And he would play, he'd play house and electronic music that, had that jazz vibe, and he would play it. And really, he opened up electronic music and house to a lot of, older jazz heads who wouldn't have known about this stuff otherwise. So, Al is somebody who bridged a lot of gaps and really made a lot of connections. And that's something that, again, you have to have a certain level of skill and quality and understanding of what you're playing to do something like that. And I just think a lot of these guys on these lists, they don't have that. They have other people do this stuff for them. I mean, that's another thing that's not such a big secret, is that even in the production area, a lot of the productions aren't even produced by some of these people. A lot of these things are being done by someone else, and then they sell it to the folks, and they take it and they run with it, and they get paid and they go on their way. Again, that's what that is. Again, there's this obsession with, you make money. Though a lot of these guys, I think, aren't making as much money as you would think, because, again, they're spending a lot of money paying for these ghost producers, and they're paying for these clicks, and they're paying for a lot of this stuff. And so certain festivals, it's like, hey, you know what, I want this slot and I'll pay for it. And the festival,
I think people would be surprised how quickly, like the top 10, those guys are making money. Like, those guys are making, pop star, celebrity, serious money. But there's a quick fall off with a lot of, I think, by the time you get to, the guys that are number 50 on the top 100, they're doing fine. They're doing, like, for being a young guy making music, or, as a music performer, or whatever you want to call it, they're doing all right. But yeah, it's a very fast fall off, I think, for a lot of these dudes, especially the younger dudes who don't also have, brands, who don't also have record catalogs and things, like other structures around them. So
it's the Wizard of Oz thing. You look behind the curtain and you see, it's not all of what it's made out to be. It's a performance. And again, life itself, I think, is a hustle in a lot of ways. So, if you've got your hustle, so be it, go for it. But also recognize that it is a hustle, and, at some point you may very well get called out for it. I don't have any, concern about folks whose, musical lifespan is short, when they, never really had any musical background in the first place, or it was very minimal and not really, worthy of the kind of, attention that was given to them. So anyways, there's a zero-sum game that some of these guys are playing. And I think that, these lists perpetuate that. And some of these lists do. And I think that it's a distraction. Again, Juan's recommendation to eliminate it altogether, I mean, in my mind, I've already eliminated it because I've never participated in that. And I've gotten emails which, encourage me to, campaign on behalf of whatever. And I've never done it. I think there was a festival or two that once made a comment about, hey, we need you to, put this list up on your thing, whatever else, and then we'll look at, booking you. And we've been like, well, then we just won't play that festival.
Right. Right. Which is probably, that's probably the smartest way to go about it. There's a big enough interest in all of this music to go around. And it's kind of amazing, especially, how some artists have, maintained, there's not too many rock artists or rappers or whatever that get to have, be in their 50s and still doing it at the level that a lot of the guys are doing it. And maybe it's, it's better that's one way to look at it, compared to, these young guys who are going to have, a great 5 years or 10 years, and then they're not going to come out the other end with much to show for it, which I think is what, one of the points you were making.
Well, and the thing is, and again, I think hip hop is a really good thing to talk about on that level too, because, hip hop, house, techno, I'm always talking about how all three start at the same time, 3 different cities, and they all really were the result of, young guys in the city taking this new gear, samplers and sequencers and these things, and kind of creating a whole new genre of music. And I always say it's all the same thing. It's just different cities' expression of the same thing in certain ways. And you look at how quickly hip-hop became corporatized and really swallowed up by these major companies in ways that fortunately didn't happen with house and techno. And you look at, the state of hip-hop, and I'm like, hip-hop I think in a lot of ways suffered greatly because of that. You don't see as many independently owned companies out there. Everyone pretty much is tied to something else, and the amount of control the artist has over their product is not on the same level that you see in electronic music and house music as well. So, I think that, I mean, there's, you've got that there too. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why you don't see some of the veteran hip hop artists out there in the same way that you would see some of the veteran electronic artists out there. But, again, I mean, I think that there's certainly more people in hip hop who've gone on to film and television than electronic artists. So,
For sure.
So they've got that too. So, but ultimately, I think that's these lists, again, the distractions, and they end up taking away from the focus on actual quality music.
Right on. Right on. So, Cornelius, thank you very much for coming on today. And yeah, like I said, just hopefully people dig a little deeper. That's all I think anybody really wants, at least in this community. Dig a little deeper, see what you find. It's ultimately a lot more fulfilling.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
I have no idea what we're talking about. So
We're perfect. We just talk.
This is great.
This is like RA Exchange meets Mark Maron.
I don't even know who either of those people.
Okay.
I'm not a podcaster.
It seems like something you'd be into. Are we recording? Tommie Sunshine, you seem like you should be a podcaster. I don't know why you're not.
I feel like my life is a podcast.
It feels like it. Dude, I have here this book, The Underground is Massive.
Oh, yeah.
How Electronic Dance Music Conquered America. This is a book that came out, I guess it came out in the spring, chronicling the American electronic music scene, starting in like the late 80s with the birth of techno and Chicago house. Mostly covers the 90s stuff. It does technically go into the 2000s and the EDM era, but I think the real meat of this book is in the 90s. And dude, you are, if I go to the index,
It's not nine of the 19 chapters.
your numbers are everywhere. I mean, I was interviewed for this book, and I'm probably in about 4 or 5 chapters, but you're in like every chapter.
I did
in this book.
I did 3 consecutive Sundays with Michelangelo, the author, and we did 7-hour sessions 3 Sundays in a row. So 21 hours of stories is it's a lot of stuff.
I felt like a chatty Cathy. We did a 3-hour Skype interview because I was in Berlin, and it was supposed to be an hour, and we talked for 3. So I felt like I was, Gabby McGabberson. So, but you're a storyteller, man.
Well, and I had actually done. There was another book that came out in the 90s called Rave America, which was written by this Canadian woman named Murray Silcott, and she couldn't afford to come to Atlanta to interview me for the Midwest chapter, so she called me instead, and we ended up having a 5-hour phone call from Canada in 1997, which at the
Cost like
conclusion of
$600.
Yeah, she was like, it would have been much cheaper for me to fly to Atlanta than it was to have this conversation. But she recorded those conversations, and those stories were still pretty fresh because they were only from a few years before. So I have to hit her up for those tapes because she said she recorded them. So
that would be great.
If she still has those, they'll be even way deeper than what I was able to tell him because there was,
it was all fresh in your memory.
Yeah, a decade and a half of MDMA damage later. It's like, how are you supposed to remember all those stories?
It doesn't come back. We don't get smarter.
Oh gosh, no.
It's a one way.
Although, you know what? I feel like I'm quite a bit smarter than I
Really?
was back then.
I hope so. Well, okay, maybe smart isn't the right word, but attuned.
Wiser,
Maybe.
yes.
Well,
definitely
and also
wiser.
you've been sober now. What?
11 years
11 years?
April.
Man,
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I mean, it's pretty funny. I mean, it's if I had ever stepped in to the EDM moment and if I was still partying, I wouldn't have made it past 2010. I don't think I would have been so all in that it just would have been like, you know.
Well, you've said that several. I think in the Rave America book, you talk about the first Further the first Further festival in Wisconsin, and the quote is, "I was going to take every drug, and if I didn't die, I was moving to Atlanta."
Yeah.
So this is a recurring.
Oh yeah, I mean it's it's better to burn out than to fade away for sure. I mean it's definitely it's definitely what it is. But you know what? I mean, I just think that we're just so lucky to have been involved in a subculture that somehow squeaked its way under the door and became mainstream culture, because it's a drug culture. Like, I mean, like there's no hiding that. I mean, like, I can be, going on 11 years sober and still very candid about the fact that, dance music is wrapped up in drug culture. So to have gotten past the mainstream and gotten past, I mean, come on, our present vice president was the one who brought the Rave Act to being. So, I mean, the fact that this is all happening under his watch while he's the vice president of the United States is such a huge victory for subculture and a huge victory for our culture.
Well, it's kind of a victory for the internet.
And
the decentralization
things,
of power and the spread of information.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just so. I mean, I just think it's so great because when we were living in the Midwest, there was a pack of oddballs from every city, and we kind of all gravitated to each other, and those numbers made those parties what they were. And I remember driving to Storm Rave. I talk about it in the book, and like, picking up like a minivan full of ravers from Cincinnati at like exit 38.
Storm Rave, for people who don't know, that was Frankie Bones's big like parties that he would do in New York. You were in Chicago at the time.
Yep, and I mean, and we met up at at an exit off the freeway and grabbed them on Route 80, and then they followed me and Kurt from Drop Bass like all the way to Brooklyn. And that's crazy. Like, no internet. No cell phones. Like, it was like if they weren't at that rest stop,
just keep going.
We would have had to keep rolling. There was like no one to call. You know, I mean, it's amazing how mobilized we were without technology. But I think that's a testament to how much we really loved what we were doing, because we were willing to get in a car and drive 8 hours to a city we'd never been to, full of people we didn't know.
To a party that may or may not go off. There may, that stood as 50-50 chance of the cops showing up.
And we just figure it out. I mean, we'd end up crashing on people's floors. And, I mean, some of those mornings at, in people's apartments in those like crazy cities in Ohio and Indiana and stuff are some of my most hilarious memories, because we were just a bunch of freaks, like taking drugs and solving the world's problems at 8 o'clock in the morning after a rave.
I think my favorite, and not to get into it's too many drug stories, but we can do one. We were at like Toledo, Ohio. We were at somebody's house. It was well into the afternoon after the party, and my buddy who had thrown the party in Toledo, he was in the bathroom, and the blinds are closed everywhere, and he grabs the blinds on the bathroom window and he just yanks them down. And I look at him, and I'm like, what did you just do? And he looked at me with the most sincere, he goes, dude, we got to tear down this black plastic. The party's over. We got to pack up. And he literally thought he was 6 hours in the past tearing down the party that he had thrown. And like,
if I'm going to throw a highlight out, I think one of my favorites was we were in my apartment in Atlanta during the Olympics in '96, which I basically don't remember much of. There was a couple of moments of clarity hanging out with Hard Kiss during that time, but not many. And there was this one party, and I had brought 30 people back to my one-bedroom apartment, really, really great idea. And I just remember one of the girls we were with was smoking a cigarette, and when she was done with the cigarette, she flicked it against the wall. She thought she thought she was in a car. She thought she was driving in a car.
It's scary. Actually, I remember the first time we met was like, okay, and I promise this will be the last one because it's nice to be tying up like a story with the two of us. It was further, I'm gonna say 2000.
Oh yeah.
This was my first further. I was a little late getting that far into the wilderness.
Right.
And it was Monday morning. Everyone was asleep. It was like the campgrounds was like empty. And this girl comes over. She's wearing fat pants and like a puffy vest. And she had a light bulb with the tip of the light bulb like broken off, like where you would screw it on. And we're like, what's with the light bulb, bitch? And she was gonna, smoke crystal or whatever.
Smoking the meth.
And I remember looking at you, and we had just met that weekend, and I was like, and we were like, nah.
No. And no.
So, anyways, everyone has a million of those stories, and you're right. It's I don't think those stories are particular to this culture, or they're not exclusive to this culture, obviously.
No,
but
yeah, I mean, I feel like there's just, I mean, I one of my favorite moments in the last couple of years with all this hysteria about like what's going on was there was like they made a big stink. There was an Avicii show in Boston, and there were like a bunch of kids showed up drunk, and I mean, Avicii's a pop star. Avicii's not a DJ. You know what I mean? Like you can't even put him in the same category. And so that they made a big deal out of it, and they're like, oh, see what this does, blah blah blah. And the following weekend, there was a Keith Urban show at the same venue, and there was like six or eight like ODs at this country show.
Oh, country music people, they while out.
Don't fuck with hillbillies, man.
No,
like
I guess
don't do like that's like the last thing you want to get into.
So, but of course, back in the day, there was some of those parties in Wisconsin. It was kind of. It was hard to tell. Like,
no, I mean,
I a hillbilly.
Oh, I mean, there were. I mean, and gosh, the majority of those parties were like, 2-3 hours outside of a major city.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you get 30 minutes outside of a major city, and it's like. You're already like,
you're completely in rural,
out of orbit.
Yeah.
I mean, like this is like like you were in
BFE, but fucking Egypt.
Last one, I promise. We were coming back from one, which was the first anniversary party of Drop Bass, and I was with Davey Dave, who is now I believe a Chicago cop or something. He was driving, and. I love that I'm telling this story, but he was driving, and there was 5 or 6 of us in his 75 Buick whatever monster car, and we were listening to Hendrix at Monterey, and we were all on acid. So we could hear Hendrix talking through his guitar, and as we were having this conversation about how we could hear Jimmy talk through his fingers. We got pulled over by the police. And this is straight up Mayberry RFD. We are in Podunk, Wisconsin. And this guy was so clueless. And we were so lit up. I mean, we all had flying saucers for eyes. And he was like, well, the way we do it out here is, I'm giving you a ticket. You were speeding. So you have to follow me back to the station to pay the ticket.
Because you're out of towner and...
Well, of course, immediately, conspiracy theory, we think that we're getting lured back and there's going to be backup there and we're all going to get thrown in jail in this little town in Wisconsin. And we ended up going into this police station and, the 6 of us, lit up like Christmas trees, and we paid the ticket, and they had absolutely no idea. I don't think they'd ever seen anybody what experience would they have with a bunch of city kids on LSD? You know what I mean?
Quite frankly, maybe the guy driving should have been on LSD, but other than that, they're used to dealing with mean fucking drunks, probably more than anything.
Right, and we were just laughing. We all had smiles on our faces.
Generally speaking, somebody who's on some sort of psychedelic is not a problem case. Yeah, unless you make them a problem.
Aggression is not really a side effect of psychedelics.
Exactly. I remember a distinct change when I was running Motor in Detroit. A little bit later, late 90s, early 2000s. We had what you would call a drug problem, or what the authorities would call a drug problem. As far as there was a lot of people on drugs in the club, And at some point there was a crackdown, and we had to really, up our security policy, and just everything had to shift, and it really just became not okay to do that there. And it became a drinking crowd.
Right.
And you saw within, 2-3 months, this kind of change happened. And all of a sudden there was fights, there was broken glass everywhere. There was, people, having to call the cops regularly to break up situations. Stuff that we never had a problem with.
Wasn't Hamtramck like unincorporated? Did they even have police there?
Hamtramck was a weird thing. For those who don't know, Hamtramck is a little municipality, couple square miles, completely within the greater Detroit municipality.
It's the weirdest thing.
But it's from back in the days when they would have the different factories, and Hamtramck was the Polish neighborhood, and it was the Polish factory that was the GM plant where all the Polish people worked, because they want to keep them separated from the blacks and the Latinos and from everything else. The Polish people had enough wherewithal to be like, well, you know what? This is our own little city, our own little community. So yes, they had their own police. And they did have police. What happened around the early 2000s is the city went bankrupt.
Oh, yeah.
So suddenly they didn't have any money to pay the police. Suddenly you had federal marshals taking half of the police shift. So we're used to have 2 Hamtramck cops. You would now have a Hamtramck cop and a federal marshal, because the federal government had to come in to shore up those gaps. So yeah, it was a weird little
garbage strikes. I was there during one of the electronic music festivals in Detroit, and there was garbage 10 feet high
everywhere.
Piled everywhere.
You know what's funny about Hamtramck now? They are now they just became the first city to have a majority Muslim town city council.
Really?
There's been a massive influx of immigrants the past few years. They have a Muslim mayor. They have I just read this last week.
No kidding.
5 out of 9 people on the city council are Muslim. So it's becoming this little microcosm on what immigration and so on, what things can actually look like.
Right, right.
Which if you had told me that, 12 years ago, 15 years ago when I was living there.
Right.
You would never imagine that. So.
Well, I've always felt like Detroit was a bit of a petri dish. I mean, for many, many things. I mean, besides incubating techno and giving that to the world, it's always been such a disaster for a really long time, socially and politically and everything else, and
which allows for a lot of experimentation.
Always. I mean, it's and for art, art is always best created in the midst of chaos. So, of course, right now, there's amazing, painting, and there's amazing street art, and there's amazing music, and there's amazing writing, because everything is absolutely fucking upside down right now. We have lunatics running for president in this country that aren't even really qualified to even do that. And they're leading the polls. I mean, this is we're living in absolute insane times. And for the common person, they look at all of these things and they process it in, things are they're kind of messed up, but whatever. But anybody who's in the arts is well, all right, they're taking this as a cue to dig in. And, now there's all this incredible stuff that's coming out left, right, and center. And I don't think I'm 44, so I don't think I've ever seen such a renaissance of art as what's going on right now.
Really?
It's pretty
You
amazing.
think so?
Oh, I definitely think so.
Okay, well, you're gonna have to clue me in a little, because I'm not up on it.
Well, I think as art always is, it's all about digging. You know what I mean? Nothing that you hear about in the mainstream, or even, and let's be honest. There was a time where Vice was considered an underground publication, but Vice is just as legitimate as anything else now.
Which is weird if you think about it, because it's
crazy.
Still,
yeah, absolutely, but still in the fringes. But essentially, it's still mainstream information. Yeah. So it's if you start to dig into the layers of all of this, there is so much incredible stuff being made. I mean, I saw some of the art at Art Basel this year, and, you know, not that that's the underground either, but there's artists all over the world that are taking, there's a guy named Ben Frost who I'm just obsessed with, and what he does is he takes prescription medicine boxes and he does graphic design on them. So he'll put like an anime character, like, you know, having an orgasm on like a Viagra box. And paint it on a Viagra box. And his art went from being worth, you know, you could get it for $75. You could get one of these hand-painted boxes for $75. And now you can't get the stuff for less than 10 grand. And it like happened in like a 6-month to a year period where he just exploded. And it's like, this stuff not only is good art, but it's outrageous social commentary. And it's really, really dead on to like what's happening right now. And I think that, I mean, I was having a conversation with one of the biggest artists in EDM who he will remain nameless because I wouldn't want him to go down with a ship on this, you know, on these comments. But what he said was, you know, he plays Vegas. He plays the biggest nightclubs in Vegas. And he said that playing in Vegas is kind of a drag because at this moment, the people who were going out, this is the first generation in recent memory where the kids are growing up more conservative than their parents. Because remember, anyone who's a teenager now, their parents were all 90s. Yeah. Those kids were all born in the 90s. Well, you and I can both attest, the 90s were a pretty dark time. Like, that was not, you know, and the world was really kind of topsy-turvy in the 90s. We didn't know what was going to happen coming out of the 90s. There was, you know, the gloom and doom of Y2K. There was, you know, the biggest music in for most of the decade was coming out of Seattle, and it wasn't very happy music. And, you know, which was why our scene in Detroit and Chicago and dance music was so reactionary to what was going on in the 90s, because the 90s were pretty fucking dark. And these kids are all a product of that. And they look at their parents and they don't want to be like that. So the way that they're interpreting their rebellion is very peculiar because they're getting much more conservative. And also the internet has made everybody much more conservative because it's cut them off from social interaction. So, you know, kids don't have the ability. I mean, my God, I was saying this to an Uber driver here in LA. We were talking about dating in 2015, and I said, I have never been more happy that I'm married in my life because I cannot imagine what Tinder and all of these things have done to the concept of just dating. You know what I mean? Like, all of this has just become like, it's like robotic. It's not even like there's no real like pathos involved in it anymore. It's like automatic.
It's kind of nice without the pathos. I mean, I'm in a relationship now, but I did have, you know, I had kind of, and obviously I'm also in my 40s, so I wasn't on that like, that, you know, swipe, get laid thing. But there's, you know, I had enough experience with the you know, the mobile apps, and I actually met my current girlfriend on Tinder. So,
there you go.
You know, it turns out it beats meeting them at clubs.
Well, I mean, a nightclub is a terrible place to meet anybody. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know, I met all my best friends at clubs. Well, friends, sure, but not women. I mean, like, come on. I mean, I have a friend, you know, we always kind of laugh, and he's always like, you know, I always have such bad luck with women. And I don't know why. And I was like, because you've met them all in nightclubs.
Yeah.
I'm like, go to the library. Go anywhere. Like, I mean, anywhere is better to meet people than a nightclub. Because, come on. I mean, there's only a small demographic of the world that even goes to nightclubs. It's
really, if you're a nightclub person, it's really hard to find someone who's not a nightclub person who will put up with it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, nightlife is a choice for sure. You know, I mean, and it's a very particular lifestyle too.
So how often? I mean, you're still in it, 120%.
Absolutely.
How often do you go out?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I mean, like, now that I don't drink, I mean, like, nightclubs have taken on a very different dynamic. And I call it the 1 a.m. rule. I mean, that wouldn't really apply here because everything wraps up a bit earlier. So here it would be like an 11 p.m. rule in LA, but in New York, it's a 1 a.m. rule. And I just forbid myself to have like a real conversation with anybody past 1 a.m. because I know they're not going to remember it.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I learned this very quickly when I first got sober. You know what I mean? Like I would have these amazing conversations with people and I'd make reference to it the next day and they'd be like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
Would have forgotten the 2-hour conversation we had where we made plans to like start something.
Unless they're
next day.
Australians, because I've learned recently that Australians have this particular pride in it. Doesn't matter what state you were in. You said it. It's real. It's happening. It's.
I respect that. I mean, like,
I just learned about this.
I mean,
from an Australian friend.
I have a lot of respect for that actually, because I mean, I went through a lot of misery of like trying to figure that frequency out. But one is the magic number. I think like that.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the cutoff. But I mean, I still go out. I mean, I'm rushing home from this trip actually to make sure that I get back in time to see Derek Carter play Cielo in New York. So
Right.
I mean, like, if you're gonna go back for something, that's a pretty damn good reason to get back home. So. But it's but I mean I'm still in it, and and I think that the best part of this whole thing. And I was talking to Alfredo this summer in Ibiza, and he was the DJ that played at Amnesia, where Oakenfold and Rampling and everybody saw him DJ, and they took his style, the Balearic style that he created, and they brought it back to London. And I said to him, well, how much has changed on this island since you got here in the 70s? And he said, well, if you look at it from how many buildings have gone up and how many people come here, that's changed. He goes, but if you really sit down and you talk about the essence of Ibiza and like what this island means and what it really is, he goes, if you're 18 years old and you come here for the first time, you are having the authentic experience that I had when I first got here.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed at all. And in that, I thought that was really poignant. But I also thought about something else, and I talk about this quite a lot. People say, that EDM has kind of spoiled the party and it's kind of messed up electronic music. But if you really sit down and be honest about it, if we look back at the parties that we went to and that we were a part of back in the day, those ratios of the number of people that were there because they really loved the music and the ratio of people that were there to like get laid and get drugs and just screw around is exactly the same. It hasn't changed. I really, truly believe that. I mean, because yes, the people that were close to me were all heads. And all the heads knew each other. But you can't throw a successful party on heads alone. There's not enough, because most of those people don't pay to get into parties anyway. So someone's got to come through those doors and pay for the lights to be turned on. So we need the tourists. We need those people to cycle through.
But it almost feels like with EDM now, it's almost split because you're not going to have any heads. At the Avicii show.
You know what?
Or whatever.
Well, I mean, but that's, that I don't even think of that as dance music anymore. When those guys cross a threshold like that and they're playing in a sports arena, I don't consider that dance music anymore. I mean, that's a show. It's a concert being put on by a promoter who is the same promoter who did Lady Antebellum the night before. So that has nothing to do with us. You know what I mean? But if you go to like real parties where people are playing real music, I see kids, they're there alone. They have no friends. They're there and their heads are down and they're just rocking out and they just love the music. And they're Shazamming records when they hear something that they like. And they are there and they're flying solo. And those kids are the same kids that I saw 20 years ago at parties. It's awesome. But I really feel like it hasn't It hasn't changed. I mean, yes, there's this whole other contingent, and Guetta and Calvin Harris and all these guys have taken this to a totally different level. But what that is has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in the underground.
Right.
And the underground is where it's at. I mean, this city has one of the healthiest like music scenes that I've seen in years. There are young kids, and I've signed a bunch of them to my record label, and they're making absolutely unfathomably innovative house music that's filtered through some sort of UK bass, craziness. And the best part about it is they don't even know what they're referencing. They don't know anything about UK garage. They don't know anything about speed garage. They have no idea about, and some of them don't even really know or didn't really experience dubstep. So they're using these sounds in a completely different way because there's nothing that's telling them that they can't.
Sure.
They don't have the hang-ups that we would have because it's like, well, we can't do that because that's like, Artful Dodger did stuff like that and we don't want to sound like that. They don't care. They just want to make music. So they're just trudging through it all, and they'll put 50 different influences into one track. And I think that what we're stepping into, not only in music, but in life, is fusion. The whole next decade of our lives will involve fusion. It's happening. I mean, this Bernie Sanders is talking about this. You know what I mean? Like, you have to adapt as a human being, and you have to realize that this is not about your little world anymore. Like, you have to wrap your head around the fact that there are more people involved in this equation, and you better get used to it. And, look at the advances that have happened. I mean, this might be a little off topic, but I'm going to talk about it anyway.
There is no off topic here,
So it was said that in 2012, that according to the Mayan calendar, the world was going to end. But after closer inspection, they brought in academics and they took a really hard look at that. And what they came to realize was that the Mayan calendar is created in eras. So in 2012, it was the end of an era. And it wasn't going to be the end of the world. It was going to be the end of that world. And nobody could possibly sway me that there has not been a categoric change in the world since 2012. If you look at what has happened since 2012, you're looking at Occupy Wall Street. You're looking at the Arab Spring. You're looking at rape culture coming into the mainstream and people starting to talk about things they never talked about before. You're talking about legal gay marriage. You're talking about legal marijuana. You're talking about... I could go on forever about this. There has been so much change since 2012, and we have walked into a new state of awareness as a species where you can't pull the same shit that you used to be able to pull because people will call you right out on it. They see right through it, and this is why I think that and I'm going to keep talking about him, but this is why I think Bernie Sanders has a chance of being the president, because he's the only person that's speaking the truth, and he's talking about things that actually matter to people. And whether it's fair pay at work, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, whatever it is that resonates with any particular person, like, he is speaking openly and factually about it. We're not used to that in politics. We're used to double talk and craziness and just, nonsense in politics. So he's speaking the truth, and so much so that it's moved me to I'm actually working with the campaign now.
Oh, wow.
So I've donated a ton of my time, and I'm playing a lot of rallies around the country. I'm doing a really cool show in Williamsburg in January January with like Thurston Moore and David Crosby and Cat Power and all these crazy people, but we're doing this like benefit in Brooklyn, and there's all these different things, and I'm actually, once it's time to really like roll up the sleeves and get in it, I'm gonna be like sitting calling people and handing out flyers on the corner, because it matters that much to me that things change, because I've been in the streets ever since Mike Brown was shot in Ferguson. I've participated in all kinds of protests in New York City and have seen a whole other side of the world through that. And, talk to people who, lived very different lives than I've lived. And it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And activism does not necessarily mean that you have to go out and risk being arrested, protesting in the streets of a city. Activism can be as small as convincing your best friend that the way that they look at something isn't really the smartest way to look at it, and taking the time to explain to them why, and swaying their opinion in a different direction. And if we all thought about it on...
Well, I do that every day on Twitter.
We try. I mean, we try. Like you do the best you can.
Not to
no. But it's. I think if people looked at it at a much more micro level, it's like, if everyone who was, consciously and centered and really had a grasp on what the hell was going on with the world, if they took their time to make sure that the 5 closest people to them were also on the level, we would have a monumental change in the world. But, sometimes people kind of overshoot it, and instead of like working on those 5 people, they're like, well, I'm just going to try to get everyone to believe what I believe.
Well, I think that's been a problem for a while. I mean, I remember going to a war protest in D.C. before the Iraq War started.
Yep.
And, we drove from, I was in Chicago at the time, and we drove, and it was, I remember very distinctly being like, I don't know what's happening. That was my feeling, is I don't think anybody knows. And I certainly don't, feel like I have enough to make to know what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
So I'm going to err on the side of not bombing, if that's okay with everybody.
Right.
Like that was really my attitude.
Right.
And plus, dude, it's a road trip. Who doesn't love a road trip? So, so we went to DC, went to this big protest, and we sat through hours of these like tangential speeches about, freeing this person and this cause and that cause, and it was so all over the place.
Yep.
That was like, we did come to the right protest, right? Like it feels like it invited everyone to the party. Everyone has to get this like mic time. Yeah. And it's spread out all over, and as a result, it was kind of like, what are we here for?
I mean, it can get spread pretty thin, but I think really it just comes down to like, it's what moves you. Mm-hmm. And it's what really like makes you rise to the occasion. So, you don't have to get involved in everything. I'm not at every protest. I can't be at every protest. Sure. Like I would be a full-time activist if I was. But, when things happen, and, I'll never forget this. There was a moment where I probably felt the most alive and the most realized that my consciousness was the most activated. It was the night that the Wilson verdict was announced, when Darren Wilson was acquitted of murdering Mike Brown in Ferguson. And that night, there were over a dozen unrelated marches that were not organized. They were spontaneous. Mm-hmm. They shut down all the bridges. They shut down the Holland Tunnel. They shut down like almost the whole city. And my wife and I were in one that was in Times Square, and it was the biggest one. And I remember marching past a wall of about 200 or 300 New York City policemen who were in full riot gear, batons out, helmets on, ready to fuck shit up. I mean, they were very, very like ready to go. And I understood both activism and the police state crystal clear in a single moment. And I was walking by this wall of policemen, and we were chanting at the time, New York is Ferguson, and Ferguson is New York. And as I was shouting this in the faces of these policemen, not only was I unfearful for what the consequences were, in real time, but I noticed something. And I looked into the eyes of those policemen. And when you're trained to be a policeman in America, you're trained to react to violence and chaos. So when someone is being chaotic and when someone is being violent, the cops know exactly what to do with that. They just beat the shit out of them.
Sure.
Or shoot them. Or just do that when they want to, more importantly. But basically, they're not trained to deal with peaceful protest. And they're definitely not trained to deal with justified anger. So these cops collectively had a look in their eyes like, oh shit. Like there are thousands of people on the streets of New York who are unified, who are disgusted with a particular thing, but they are not violent. They're not going to get violent. They're not here to cause trouble. So what the fuck do we do? Mm-hmm. And they didn't know what to do. And since then, things have gotten a bit more complicated in New York because they handed over the responsibility of patrolling these protests from the regular police force to the anti-terrorism force of New York City. So
okay, I didn't know this.
when somebody phones in a bomb threat, mm-hmm. they call the same people as they send to protests now. So you're dealing with people that are trained to be aggressive, to be violent. And these people now, and we talk in and amongst ourselves, the people who are activists in New York, and this new breed of policemen that they've brought into the equation in New York are exceptionally violent. They will step right into whatever's going on and will just start swinging. They don't care. Mm-hmm. They're trained to do that because they're just trying to break the attention of what's going on. It's a tactic. And unfortunately it works because people get scared. Because who the hell wants a baton to their head? And these guys don't stop because lots of them came out of, the Israeli training force and they're all trained by all this craziness. So they're very, very aggressive. But I mean, to think about that, like these are the same people that are called in for bomb threats and for actual terrorism. But, now as activists in this country, we are categorized and we are logged as terrorists because we're speaking out against the status quo. And not to go down a rabbit hole, but
I think we're already in the rabbit hole. So please just continue.
But it's worth mentioning. I mean, when you attend a protest in America now, they have the ability, and they've been doing it for a while now. They drive this crazy vehicle in, which has these antennas on top, mm-hmm. and this thing that twirls around, and it pings everybody's cell phone who's at the protest. So they log you as present. They're doing mm-hmm. roll call every time. So they start to notice trends and they're like, this person's at all these protests. And they start logging this stuff. So most activists in this country have FBI files and they don't even know it.
Well, I don't know that a lot of this stuff is so new. Maybe some of the tactics, some of the techniques, but it sounds like 1968 Democratic convention in Chicago. Like,
no,
this is
I
not-
mean, come on. I mean, absolutely. And what's funny is, not funny, but isn't it peculiar that it keeps going back to Chicago? Like Chicago's, they're always the motherfuckers that are screwing this up. Like every time. Like, it's like, why Chicago? It just keeps going back
It's such
to
a
Chicago.
nice city. It's such a nice city. People.
I mean, they're in a lot of shit. The Department of
I
Justice
know.
is doing this like comprehensive, like they're digging into what's going on in the police force there.
Chicago and Illinois in general. Just I would they had like 3 governors in a row go to jail or something. They're running a level of corruption that was probably this is the kind of shit you hear about when you hear about like the L.A. police chief that came here and blew out the whole. Basically fired the whole LA police force and brought in all guys from like Alabama and Mississippi, and hence the problems you have now. But how do they have such an awesome city then? Because Chicago on a whole is a great place.
Well, you know what? If you really dig into that, I think the reason why Chicago is so great, and I would have said this 20 years ago, is because of its diversity. I mean, there is such ethnic diversity in Chicago, and it's all immigrants. Like it's Mexican immigrants, it's Polish immigrants, it's Italian immigrants. I mean, going back probably 100 years in order to, use that appropriately. But I mean, I lived right next to a neighborhood in Chicago. It was the Ukrainian Village. That was the name of the neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like it was all right there.
Yeah, it was Chicago's version of Hamtramck.
Right,
basically.
right. And it's like, all these different little microcosms. Sure, there was conflict. There's always been conflict. But, for the most part, all of it worked together and still works together. And, they've got a little bit of a scenario going on the South Side there right now that they can't really get their finger on. But, that's what happens when you look the other way for decades at something. And just, of course it's going to get out of control.
Well, they looked the other way. Plus, they pushed a lot of, I used to live on the the cusp of, I was at 26th and State in Chicago. Yeah. Right next to the Robert Taylor like housing projects.
Robert Taylor.
It was really
that's real shit.
Really, really dicey. That's all fucking condos now.
It's
so they kind of just keep squeezing that population into tighter confines.
I mean, there is there's a boiling point, and I think we're living in it. You know what I mean? Like, I think that what people have to realize if they want to accurately process what's going on in the world right now, you can't say, no one can say that they're waiting for the revolution to happen, because the revolution is happening. It's been happening. We are living in the revolution. Like, we will be telling our kids stories about this time period and how tumultuous it was and how all these things were up in the air. But it's happening right now, like all around us. We are bearing witness to said revolution. And it might not be so defined, and it might not be so but I think the reason why that is because it's not one segment of the population going against the other. It's this whole collective consciousness where everyone's like, you know what? Everything's kind of fucked up. We kind of need to reel it in. Like, and I don't think anyone disagrees with that. I mean, maybe on the finer points, but I think everyone, if you really got to the root of it, if you had the time to have a dinner conversation with any of your neighbors, you would get to the fact that you're probably, even though the way you would go about it would be different, you're probably, your end goals are pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, my girlfriend's dad's a Trump supporter. And I don't know if he still is. He was 4 months ago.
I won't even ask my father.
We talked about it.
What he's doing.
But frankly, you're right in that even though the approach is so from the other end. Well, basically, when I asked why is he a Trump supporter? Because he's just because everyone sucks.
Well, hang on. Well, so let's get this down to the root. Why do all those people want Trump to take power? Because they want change. Why do all of Bernie Sanders supporters want him to be? Because they all want change. Well, guess what? There it is.
Yeah,
we all want change. We all want this to change. Well, it's going to take some like actual like work. People are going to have to go out and vote, which they don't normally do. So they're going to have to get off their ass and participate in the process. So if they do, and if we see substantial voter turnout this time around, then no one can really bitch, because if like a huge segment of the population votes, there it is. There's the decision. You know what I mean? Like, listen, I was as much of a conspiracy theorist nut job as anybody was growing up. Like, I remember saying, like, oh, it doesn't matter, lizard people. You don't want to. It doesn't matter if you vote. It doesn't matter anyway. Well, if they can convince people of that, that's their victory. That's the system winning over you. The only way you can win over the system is to vote against the system. And you really have to get involved, and you have to engage. And that just doesn't, I'm not just talking about going to a polling place and voting for the president. This has to do with every aspect of life. Like, if you want to sit in your apartment and curse the world, nothing will ever change. If you want to actually leave your apartment and participate in what goes on in the world, you do your best to steer things in a different direction. And I try that as an artist and as a presence on social media and things like that. I mean, listen, I might say something that, to me might seem particularly profound, and no one cares. But then on a different day, I'll say something along the same lines, and it resonates with hundreds of people. And to me, that's a small victory, because if I can make anyone, even if it's one person, change the way that they think about something for the better, now we're getting somewhere. I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, it's just about making things and pushing things in a better direction so that this life that we're all sharing collectively. I mean, we all struggle. Life is hard. You know what I mean? Like, it is. You have to work. There's never enough time to spend with the people who you love. I mean, everyone, we're all going through the same shit. If everyone would just realize that we're all not so different in the end. We're just all trying to get to a place where we can all be happy. And you have to work at that. Like, you have to actually participate, and you have to actually like want to have that. And I can tell you, as somebody who's well on the other side of the party train, and well on the other side of being, kind of arms folded, that nothing matters and blah blah blah. When you get to the other side of that, life is good, man. Like, I mean, like, I love every day. I wake up with a smile on my face, and there is nothing that ever really gets me down, because I know, even if it is a particularly bad thing, then you just, you adjust. And if that means you have to like go march through the streets of New York for 6 hours that night, so be it. But I participate, and I urge everybody else to do the same.
All right, well, not at all where I thought this conversation was going to go, but awesome. I love it. That's the whole point. That's the whole reason why we started doing this podcast.
Well, I mean, when I sat down, I said, "What are we talking about?" You said, "I don't know." So I was like, "Well, I don't know either."
Well, no, it's wonderful, and unfortunately, we have to give up the studio now because there's other people waiting to get in here. But Tommie, thank you so much.
My pleasure
for coming, and we will definitely, if I'd like to do this again.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe in
we can talk about what you want to talk about next.
No, I want to keep going on this. You'll be our good vibes correspondent. Bring in every couple months. So
I'm down for that.
So awesome. So all right, cool. Thanks again.
All right, take care.
That's it for this episode of the Rave Curious Podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more conversations with key players in the electronic music community. If you like what you heard on this podcast, let us know. You can give us a shout on Twitter at Rave Curious. You can also like us on Facebook, Rave Curious Podcast. And of course, subscribe on iTunes to make sure you never miss an episode. That's it. Thanks for listening.